So the name of this video is The Rapture of the Bride and Satan's Little Season. So you may wonder what on earth the rapture of the bride and Satan's little season, or that little while that during which Satan is released, what on earth do these have to do with each other? They are connected. And I'm going to show you how they're connected. One of the reasons why I like keeping comments open and I like having dialogue with other people, and even people who don't agree with, what I think, and I don't really care if people agree with me or not. Half the time I don't agree with me, and I may shift or change or have an alteration to a belief that I used to hold. Personally, I think that's a good thing. I think we should be open. So I've been thinking about Satan's little season and what is going to be happening there. How does that fit into the whole story of Revelation? And actually, how does that fit into the whole message of the Bible? I'm, like always, thinking about stuff, and had an aha moment that I thought I would share with you. And I'm going to incorporate this into my video series on the bride from Genesis to Revelation, because this is a really important part of the whole bridal wedding story that's found in Revelation. It's just now coming to my understanding of what is going on during that time after Satan is released. So we're going to be talking about the millennium. We're going to be talking about the bride. We're going to talk about the rapture of the bride, and what does that have to do with Satan's little season when he's released to deceive the nations at the end of the millennium. Believers who are changed from mortal to immortal are going to rule with Christ for 1,000 years. And it's really important to understand that the 1,000-year reign of Christ is actually a literal 1,000 years. Okay, all units of time, all measurements of time in Revelation are meant to be taken literally. And the idea of the millennium is actually mentioned 3 times in Scripture, and a 4th time it's sort of tucked away inside of 2 Peter. But believers are going to rule with Christ for 1,000 years. And Christ's rule is actually limited to 1,000 years. This day of the Lord has a time frame. There's a time limit on it, and that is 1,000 years. The day of the Lord is also known as the millennium. That's how we think about it. Or if you were living at the time of Christ and before, this would be called the kingdom age. This is the day of the Lord, and the kingdom, which we are praying is coming, thy kingdom come, is actually limited to 1,000 years. Now, 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 8 and 10 to 13 is a little passage that talks about several things. It talks about the day of the Lord coming in like a thief in the night, how one day is as 1,000 years. And after the day of the Lord, the earth is going to pass away, the heavens are going to pass away, and then we'll have the day of God. So let's read what Peter has to say in 2 Peter chapter 3. But do not overlook this one fact, beloved, that with the Lord 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as 1 day. And then we're just going to skip to verse 10. But the day of the Lord, okay, this is that 1,000-year day, will come like a thief, and then the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the heavenly bodies will be burned up and dissolved, and the earth and the works that are done on it will be exposed. Okay? And that's basically where we would insert the great white throne judgment. And since all these things are thus to be dissolved, what sort of people ought you to be in lives of holiness and godliness, waiting for and hastening the coming of the day of God, which, by the way, is different than the day of the Lord, because of which the heavens will be set on fire and dissolved, and the heavenly bodies will melt as they burn. But according to his promise, we are waiting for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. Okay, Peter is actually making these huge time jumps from the day of the Lord to the day of God. And what he says is, yes, of course, we're waiting for the day of the Lord, but what we're really waiting for is the coming day of God, when there will be a new heavens and a new earth. So we're told that the day of the Lord is going to come like a thief in the night, and Paul tells us that as well. We're told it's going to last 1,000 years, after which the heavens and the earth will be dissolved, thus ushering in the day of God. Now, Peter doesn't talk about Satan's little season. That is going to be sort of that little interlude between the day of the Lord and the day of God. But let's look at the 1,000 years in Revelation 20, the last half of verse 4 through 6, and then verse 11. They came to life, that is, the martyrs who were beheaded by the beast. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. And the rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. And by the way, first here just means best or premier. It's the one you want to be a part of. Why is that? It's because this is the resurrection where people will get celestial bodies and they'll rule with Christ. Verse 6, blessed and holy is the one who shares in the first resurrection. Over such the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him for 1,000 years. So we see that the martyrs of the beast are also going to be kings and priests, just like the 24 elders, just like the 144,000. They're going to rule and reign with Christ. They're believers. They're part of the body of Christ. And then I saw a great white throne and him who was seated on it, and from his presence earth and sky fled away, and no place was found for them. So that's where everything gets dissolved. Hebrews 1, 10 through 12. You, Lord, laid the foundation of the earth in the beginning, and the heavens are the works of your hands, and they will perish, but you remain. They will all wear out like a garment, and like a robe you will roll them up, and like a garment they will be changed. Okay, but you are the same, and your years will have no end. So this earth, this present heaven, present earth is like a garment. And there's coming a day when all of that is just going to be rolled up, and we're told it's going to burn, and there will be a new garment. Like a garment, they will be changed. So let's talk a bit about the millennium. At the beginning of the millennium, the Holy Spirit is going to be poured out on everyone who enters into Christ's kingdom. Okay, and I've done videos on that. I think the video series I did on the Tabernacles prophecy, I talk about that. So it's during that Feast of Tabernacles when Christ sets up his kingdom that the Holy Spirit is going to be poured out on everybody. So Israel at that time is going to be head of the nations, and Jesus is going to rule from Jerusalem. Now, according to the prophecy that we read about in Daniel chapter 9, we know that once Jesus returns to earth at the end of the 70th week, that Israel's rebellion against God will be brought to an end. And that is the whole point of the 70-week prophecy. When Daniel was praying, he was basically saying to the Lord, are you going to make good on your promises to bring us back to Jerusalem after this 70 years of captivity is over? And God sends Gabriel to Daniel with a message, basically saying, I'll do you one better than that. I'll send you back to Jerusalem. There'll be this period of 490 years, 70 weeks of 7 years, after which, at the very end of it, Israel will never rebel again. So this is one of the promises that God has for the nation of Israel, that their rebellion will be over once Jesus returns. And this is going to play into the whole little season, short time that Satan is released. We have to remember that this is a promise that God made, and the promises that God made to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, he is going to fulfill. And this very precious prophecy in Daniel, which, the point of it is that Israel is going to be brought to a place of total submission, surrender, and love for Christ. So during that 1,000 years, Christ and believers are going to rule over mankind with a rod of iron for 1,000 years. So what does this mean? Well, first it means that Christ is going to reign supreme over the whole earth as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. His word is going to be the law of the land. And believers are going to assist him in enforcing these laws as his elders, okay, just like Moses who's a type of Christ, and he had elders. He actually had 70 elders, but Christ has elders too who assist him. And so believers who have their celestial bodies, who've been glorified and given authority to rule, will assist Christ in enforcing his laws, and having received this authority to act on his behalf once we're glorified. And by the way, glorification has nothing to do with us having immortal bodies. Glorification has to do with us being given authority to rule. Just like when Christ was glorified, he was seated at God's right hand and given authority. He said, all authority has been given to me in heaven and earth. During the millennium, the world will be at peace. Righteous laws will be established. The earth is going to be beautiful. It's going to be productive. The reaper will overtake the sower. It'll be a time of plenty and prosperity and peace. And we look at that and we think, oh, this is so wonderful. It'd be just great to have a world where there's no hunger, where there's no killing, no murder, no weapons. Wouldn't that be beautiful? And in addition to that, the lifespans will increase. Okay, something that had actually been limited at the time of Noah and the flood, where God said, my spirit will not always strive with man. His days will be 120 years. Lifespans will increase again because that limitation will be removed, because that fallen angel influence that incites people to wickedness and ever increasing sin, and people lying on their beds at night trying to think of new ways to sin. Okay, that'll be over. So all the fallen entities will have been judged by Christ, put into the lake of fire, with the exception of Satan, who's put in the pit, which is a different place, and death and Hades, who will still be operating under Christ's headship. So the earth is going to be beautiful, lovely. Lifespans will be increased. Lots of children will be born. As believers, we don't have children, but the people living on earth who are mortal people at that time, they will have children. But there is a caveat to all of this wonderfulness, that even though Satan and the demons and all the fallen ones are not going to be allowed to tempt or entice or meddle with humanity, people will still have a sin nature. And that sin nature will rear its ugly head in thoughts and deeds, in sinful thoughts and sinful deeds. And misdeeds will have a consequence during the millennium. Rebellious thoughts, as long as they remain unexpressed and people don't act on what they're thinking, there, as far as we know, won't be any consequences for that. But people who sin, they steal, they do whatever, they don't come up to Jerusalem during the Feast of Tabernacles, there will be consequences for bad behavior. So everyone is going to have the opportunity to choose to follow Jesus and be filled with the Holy Spirit at the beginning of the kingdom age. Okay, and the Spirit is going to be poured out on everyone, and this is going to enable everybody to love and obey Christ from the heart. But by the end of the millennium, most of humanity will no longer love Jesus. Okay, and actually most of the people who are alive at that time will have never lived through the things that people who went into the millennium would have lived through: wars, poverty, hatred, abuse of children, abuse of God's world. The people living at the end of the millennium are not going to have personal firsthand knowledge of any of that. It'll just be information that they read about in books. Most of these people, if not all of them, with the exception of Israel and perhaps the exception of a few people who will join themselves to the nation of Israel, by the end of the millennium, they are not going to be obeying Christ from the heart even though they are forced to obey him when it comes to their actions. They still have to submit to his laws. By the end of the millennium, they're going to do this not because they love him or want to serve him, but because they don't want the consequences of bad behavior. So they're not going to have the indwelling presence of the Spirit inside of them, even though it's still possible that they could have him. And there even may be some people who apostatize, that they do have the Spirit, but in the end they decide to follow Satan. So once the 1,000 years are over, believers are going to be brought into heaven to receive additional rewards that are going to be accrued during their faithful ministry during the 1,000 years. Okay, this is not the Bema seat. The Bema seat is where believers are going to receive rewards and be judged and so on before the millennium. After the millennium, believers are going to receive additional rewards for what they've done during that time. And the rewards that believers will receive at the end of the millennium are represented by fine linen garments. So let's take a look at Revelation 19, verse 7. Let us rejoice and exult and give him the glory, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready, and it was granted her to clothe herself with fine linen, bright and pure, for the fine linen is the righteous deeds of the saints. This is the actual rapture of the bride, when the bride, who is made up of all the glorified sons of God, is finally brought into heaven and assembled into one entity, now represented by the New Jerusalem, and given additional beauty and glory. Every believer will have a place in the city. They'll be rewarded according to how they served Christ during the kingdom age. So as with the Bema seat rewards, believers will be brought to heaven to receive them from the Lord. Will Christ go with us into heaven? This is at the end of the 1,000 years, and I'll be doing another video where I'll demonstrate the chronology of how we know that the bride does not show up until after the end of the millennium. I'll show you that. It'll be very clear to you, but we're not going to do that right now. I'm just showing you where the bride is here and how believers who are ruling with Christ during the millennium are going to be brought into heaven to receive these additional rewards. I want to reinforce this other idea with you, that regular people living on the earth at that time are going to be mortal. They're not immortal, and they're still going to have a sin nature. All of the demons, all the fallen angels will have already been cast into the lake of fire, having been cast there at the time of Jesus' return to the earth. And what this means is that the evil that was introduced, perpetuated, and energized by the fallen powers and principalities, the enemies with whom we are presently warring right now, won't be an issue for the people who live during the millennium. Satan will have been chained in the pit as well. So when people sin, there isn't going to be anybody to blame except for themselves. You can't blame the demons. You can't blame the harlot system. You can't blame the beast or Satan. Only your own sinful, rebellious heart. So as long as Christ and his assistants, that is, glorified believers, are here on earth, all sinful acts done by mankind will be dealt with swiftly and justly. And Jesus will have a zero tolerance policy for evil actions. Everyone must obey him, and they must obey us as well, or suffer the consequences of divine justice, consequences which will be carried out swiftly. Just as Moses had those 70 elders to assist him in leading the nation of Israel during their wilderness wanderings, Jesus will have elders to assist him as well. And after the millennium is over, and Satan is released for a little while, believers will leave the earth in preparation for the marriage supper. Remember in the beginning of this video, I said that the reign of Christ is limited to 1,000 years. Okay, just 1,000 years that people have to submit to the rule of Christ and submit to believers who've been glorified, and we're ruling with a rod of iron. And we know that believers are going to receive these additional rewards, the fine white linen garments that are bright and pure, and that rewards are given not on earth. These are rewards that are going to be given by the Lord in heaven. So what this means is that believers and Jesus will most likely ascend into heaven, okay? And Israel will remain here on the earth after the millennium is over. And they're the ones that are holding the fort, as it were. And I can't emphasize this fact enough, that the nation of Israel will never rebel again. So they're going to continue to be loyal to Christ and obey him from the heart, even in his absence. I always like to take a thought that I'm thinking here, like believers going into heaven to receive their rewards there, and Jesus and his assistants going into heaven, actually leaving Israel to deal with the earth. Is there any precedent for any of this in the Old Testament? Is there any Old Testament pattern? Because if I can't find something that's similar to this, that's sort of predictive programming, then I will set something aside. But there is an Old Testament pattern that I think applies to this short time after the kingdom age is over and Satan is going to be released. Okay. So Exodus 24, I'm going to read verses 9 through 11, and then chapter 32, verse 1. Then Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel went up. Okay, and this is the story of after the nation of Israel had been led out of Egypt and they come to Mount Sinai and they're making this covenant with God. After the people said, we will obey God, then Moses and Nadab and Abihu, and Aaron, who are priests, and 70 of the elders went up to the mountain. Okay, and they saw the God of Israel. There was under his feet, as it were, a pavement of sapphire stone like the very heaven for clearness. And he didn't lay his hand on the chief men of the people of Israel, that is, the elders. They weren't killed because they saw him. They beheld God and ate and drank. Okay, so that's the covenant meal that usually came after the making of a covenant. Okay, later on, Moses and Aaron and everybody comes back down, and Moses goes back up the mountain. Chapter 32, verse 1. And when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what has become of him. So when Moses was out of the sight of the people and there wasn't any certain sign that he would reappear, and he was gone for a long time, okay, the people rebelled against the Lord. And they told Aaron, make a golden calf, give us a god of some kind. And the people began to worship it. And this incident, I believe, provides a pattern for what will happen once Jesus and believers go to heaven to get ready for the wedding. Once the outward restraint of believers being here, ruling with Christ with a rod of iron, once this outward restraint is removed, the people on earth are going to go wild. And we see something about this in Psalm chapter 2, verses 1 through 6. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds asunder and cast away their cords from us. Okay, let's throw off all of this restraint that we've had. Now, we also know that once Satan is released from the pit, he's going to be allowed to deceive the nations. So what kind of deceptions might he employ? Well, perhaps he's going to deceive people into believing that Jesus left and he has no intention of returning. That the millennial kingdom age is over. Okay, that 1,000 years is over and he's gone and his assistants are gone. And now everyone can just live like they want to live. that somehow or another, the era of Israel and their Messiah has timed out like forever. And the ancient prophecies, well, they're fulfilled, and now Jesus and his people have left to go live in heaven. Okay, and these are some of the deceptions that he might bring to the people. And Satan might even claim that once Jesus and his people have left, that they're never coming back again. Okay, sort of like Moses up on the mountain. Yeah, he's never coming back. Make us gods to go before us. These and other kinds of lies may be suggested by the enemy. He's going to promise them freedom and autonomy, that they can live as they choose, something that couldn't have been done during Christ's rule. Not without consequences anyway. Finally, they will be able to live as they please without restraint. Now, according to Genesis chapter 1, mankind was given dominion over the earth. This is a stewardship that was given to people who are made in God's image. And Satan knows that only mankind has the God-given authority to rule the earth. So, if Satan wants to rule the earth, he has to find a man that he can use. He has to find a man with leadership skills through whom he can reign. And remember, there's going to be kings on the earth during the millennium. Okay, there's still going to be nations, there's still going to be kings. And there is going to be a man chosen for this position, basically as Satan's new son. And this man is symbolized by the name Gog, that simply means a leader. So this is going to be Satan's new son. So 1,000 years and change during this time of tribulation and transition, Satan will have had a different man known as the Antichrist, the beast, and this is going to be, it's his son. The beast is his son, to whom he gives power, throne, and authority, just like God gave Jesus a power, throne, and great authority. However, once Jesus returned as king at his second coming, the beast and anyone associated with the beast kingdom were judged and cast into the lake of fire. So the beast isn't available anymore. The Antichrist can't be used. So this is why Satan has to find another man, okay? And it has to be a man through whom he can work and eventually conquer the earth. Whereas the beast was a man who was indwelled by a fallen angel. That's Apollyon will indwell the beast. Gog is a man with no demonic or fallen angel nature or influence. The only influence that he has is Satan. We're not told that Satan indwells Gog at that time, though I suppose that's possible. However, here's the point, that it's in the absence of Christ and the elders who are suppressing all of the evil and wickedness in the hearts of humanity. All this repressed anger, this simmering rebellion, this animosity that had been held in check by Christ and his assistants will suddenly boil to the surface among sinful men. And Satan is going to take advantage of that. He will be released from his prison, and he's going to deceive people into believing that Christ was a despot, and that they should now rise up and take the earth for themselves, that they have the right to do as they please and live as they desire without consequence, and the only thing holding them back is believing faithful Israel, whose capital is the beloved city, and the camp of the saints is their little army that they have around the beloved city. Now, war is actually, at that time, is going to be a thing of the past, and it's something they only read about in history books, but it's going to rear its ugly head once more. And Jesus' rule of peace, which required that all weapons of war be converted into agricultural implements, is going to be overthrown. War is going to be the means by which Satan will attempt to regain the earth. And he's going to incite humanity to attack the beloved city, to attack Jerusalem, and wipe out Israel. Okay, and remember, Israel cannot cease from being a nation before the Lord. So Satan is going to attempt to regain control of the earth while the bride is in heaven. So how long is he going to have to accomplish this? How long is that little season, that little while? I know there are people who teach that it's like hundreds of years, but it's not. The Bible doesn't say, but I don't believe that it will be long. Perhaps only a matter of a year or two at most, because all of this rebellion that has been suppressed is going to come flooding out. And if people even only have sticks and stones to fight with, that will be good enough. So the nations will assemble from the four corners of the earth, and they're going to assemble to wipe out the nation of Israel. And fire is going to rain down from heaven, bringing that final rebellion to an end. So let's read about this. This is in Revelation 20, verses 7 through 10. And when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison. And he's going to come out to deceive the nations that are at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. Their number is like the sand of the sea. Okay, it's huge. And will it be every single person from all the nations? Well, probably not every single individual, because there's always a remnant. There's always individual people who attach themselves to Israel. For example, Rahab in the Old Testament, or King David had Uriah the Hittite, who wasn't of Israel, who attached himself to David. So of course there's going to be individuals, remnants of people from the nations who will no doubt flee to the beloved city and be take shelter with the nation of Israel and cast their lot with them. But the majority of the people on the earth at that time are going to come against Israel. Verse 9. And they marched up over the broad plain of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city. But fire came down from heaven and consumed them. And the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet were, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. And by the way, the people who sided with Satan and with Gog are themselves going to be cast into the lake of fire. And this is in Revelation chapter 21. I'll start with verse 7. The one who conquers will have this heritage, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. And I talked about this, who is God's son in this case. It's actually Israel, faithful Israel, who will be seated in God's presence at that time. This is in connection with all the judgments that are going on after the millennium. The one who conquers will have this heritage, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. But as for the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, as for murderers, the sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, their portion will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. During the millennium, all of these people will have had an opportunity to live in a world that's run by Christ, and they will not want to do that, okay? And what that little while that Satan is released, all of that hatred and rebellion that had been hiding out in people's hearts, all of these people will be brought to the surface. And they're going to be sexually immoral. They're going to do whatever they feel like doing. They're going to murder people. They're going to be detestable. They're faithless, cowards, idolaters, and all liars. They're also believing the lie and telling the lies. And their portion is in the lake of fire and sulfur. Okay, that's where they're going to go. They're going to know what it's like to live under Christ, but they're in their heart, they do not want to live that way. And that's why they are going to be cast into the lake of fire. This is not talking about just regular people who are cowards or faithless. This is talking about people who will be living at the end after the millennium is over. So let me just kind of summarize this. And I'm going to be doing a full a series on the bride from Genesis to Revelation, just like I did a series on sons from Genesis to Revelation. But I thought I would do this little season, what's happening during the little season. And the thing that was kind of new to me was the idea that the place where believers are going to receive their fine linen garments is not here on earth. It's actually going to be in heaven. And that the 1,000-year reign, where we are actually working with Christ, comes to an end, and then we're done. Our job is over, and Christ will be done at the end of the 1,000 years too. So that is exactly how long that rule is. And that's when things change. That's when Satan gets released. That's when believers go to heaven. It's when Jesus goes to heaven. And Jesus is going to hand out rewards for those of us who faithfully served during the millennium. We get additional glory added to us, and all that's done in heaven. So if that's done in heaven, and Jesus is there giving us this honor and glory, and we're there, we're not on the earth anymore. And we know that Satan is released. So what is happening to the people on earth during that time, and what is happening with regard to the nation of Israel? Well, what we see is that Israel, the beloved city, and the camp of the saints, and again, that word camp just has to do with a military encampment. That is, they have their military prepared outside the city, that they're ready to face every other nation on earth for the sake of Christ and his kingdom and his glory, and they're willing to sacrifice themselves to that end. Okay, that's a beautiful thing. And here's the other thing, is that even though people teach and believe that God has an eternal plan for the nation of Israel, they don't tend to follow it through all the way to the end. Okay, and God's eternal plan is that Israel would eventually have a certain role to play in his kingdom. And I talked about this in the video that I did on sons from Genesis to Revelation. This little season, Rapture of the Bride, just more confirmation to me anyway, that we're on the right track as far as interpreting the book of Revelation and God's big plan, what he's doing in his eternal plan, and where everybody fits into that, okay? Where believers fit into it, where Israel fits into it, where the fallen angels and Satan and all of that, where they fit into this plan. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I've enjoyed making it. And don't forget to get a copy of my book, Convergence. I think this is a valuable book for this year, especially 2025. It's also in Portuguese now and will be coming out in French. And don't forget to take a look at the timelines and all of the resources that are below in the description box. So let me know what you think in the comment section below. And until the next video, I pray you have a very, very blessed day.